Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment to ask you to check me out on Patreon. There are several tiers with great benefits, including ad-free episodes delivered early to patrons. You can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com through Buy Me a Coffee or through e-transfer at crwbaird@gmail.com. Donations help keep the show going. I've also released my first history book, Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway. You can find it in most bookstores in Canada and through online retailers. You can find the links for Patreon, donating, and my book in my show notes. Okay, let's get to the show. It's February 1988. The air is thin and sharp as volunteers zip up red and white jackets. Their breath is seen as they rehearse smiling and waving because soon they'll be hosting people from all over the world. Their city isn't a global destination, but this is the oil town's coming out party. And as cowboy boots squeak in the snow, they know tonight is the big night. A quiet anxiety hangs in the air. There's a lot at stake. Canada has never won a gold medal at home, and the country is hoping that changes at these games. And they're not the only ones. Athletes here will chase perfection, knowing one mistake can echo forever. Some have trained their whole lives for this moment, while others have simply arrived, wide-eyed, underfunded, and unforgettable. Nervous laughter ripples across the tens of thousands gathered at McMahon Stadium. In the air, there's a sense that this isn't just about athletic excellence and medals. It's about what happens when the world comes together to celebrate humanity. And we'll see its magic when the Bryans collide, when an English ski jumper flies farther than anyone thought he could, and also when a bobsled from the Caribbean rattles into history. But before any of that can happen, a flame must be lit. I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X. This month I'm sharing Canada's Olympic stories. In this episode, we travel back to the moment the world learned how to pronounce Calgary. This is the story of the 1988 Winter Olympics. When the Olympic flame was lit on February 13, 1988, it marked the first time the Winter Olympics had ever been hosted in Canada. Since the birth of the Games in 1924, Canada had been waiting with bated breath to welcome the world. The fact alone carried weight. Canada had helped invent many winter sports, hosted international competitions for decades, and yet had never staged the Olympics on its own soil despite having tried many times. On April 10, 1929, representatives from Montreal were feeling optimistic. Their biggest challenge was Lake Placid. This village in upstate New York had a ski jump and speed skating venue, but not much else. Yet organizers boasted to the Olympic Committee they had the best winter sports facilities in the United States and it could host 1,700 people. Sir George McLaren Brown, the head of the Canadian delegation, countered that they could host 70,000. He said, quote, "Montreal has everything any other city in the United States possesses and its own special recommendations, as well as mountains, rivers, the St. Lawrence River and the Ottawa River, islands, French and English culture, and Montreal is the second oldest city in North America, and there are 1 million fine people ready to say bienvenue." End quote. But the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, instead selected Lake Placid, and in 1932 it became the first in the United States to host the Winter Games. Montreal tried again for the 1936 Winter Olympics, but they went to Berlin, which also received the Summer Games that year. That would be the last time that happened. Then the Second World War broke out, and if you remember my episode on Barbara Ann Scott, you'll recall that the Games returned in 1948 to St. Moritz. Meanwhile, Montreal kept pitching the IOC to host the Games. They had tried and failed in 1944 and then again in 1956. Both times they lost to Cortina d'Ampezzo in Italy. After failing 3 times, Montreal focused on the Summer Olympics, which they won. Canada finally hosted the world during the 1976 Games. But the winter ones were elusive. Could a prairie city, known more for oil rigs and rodeos, then carry the hope of a nation? Well, Calgary was determined to try. After all, Canada prided itself on its winter identity. Hockey, skating, skiing were supposed to be Canadian domains, and yet the Winter Olympics kept going to Europe, the United States, Japan. On May 26, 1959, Calgary hoped to change all that. They had picked up where Montreal left off, and the Oil City was hoping to host the 1964 Winter Olympics, but many knew they didn't stand much of a chance. Squaw Valley, California, now known as Olympic Valley, had hosted in 1960, and it would be highly unlikely that the IOC would award 2 consecutive games to North America. Instead, the Olympics went to Innsbruck, Austria. By the late 1970s, Calgary was ready to try again. It was an absolute travesty and embarrassment that since 1924, the Winter Games had been held in Europe 10 times, the United States 4 times, including half of that in Lake Placid. So Frank King and Bob Niven of Calgary's Booster Club made a renewed effort for the Games in 1978. The Canadian Olympic Association joined a year later in the efforts for an official bid for the 1988 Winter Olympics. And it would be an uphill battle. For one thing, Calgary didn't have an Olympic-sized sports facilities. If the city won their bid, everything would have to be built from scratch at an incredible cost. Despite this, Calgary's Olympic Committee forged ahead and built support. The Calgary Olympic Development Association sold 80,000 memberships to Calgarians at $5 each and secured another $270 million in federal and provincial funding. Members also traveled 2 million kilometers around the world to visit nearly every one of the 82 IOC members to lobby for Calgary. Alberta's oil industry was booming, money was flowing, confidence was high, and the city was marketing itself as a vibrant economy only an hour away from the Rocky Mountains and the world-famous resort town of Banff. The city also pointed to the fact it hosted the Calgary Stampede, one of the largest festivals in North America every single year. Calgary's Olympic bid had been ambitious, and as the International Olympic Committee met in Baden-Baden, West Germany, the city was up against Falun, Sweden, and Cortina d'Ampezzo, Italy. One expected Cortina d'Ampezzo to win, but to everyone's surprise, it was eliminated in the first round. Katie Fisher with Canada Sports Hall of Fame said Calgary's hopes were high as they entered the second round. They had tried and failed in their bids for the 1968, 1972, and 1976 games, but this one would be different.
Yeah, so Calgary bid 4 times before the successful bid was awarded in 81. So they had, short amount of time to, as a host city, to create all these event locations and planning. And it was a huge undertaking. And if Calgary had hosted it earlier, I think it would have been a little bit different.
In the second round, Calgary defeated Falun by 17 votes. It was a victory not just for the city, but for the country. Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed burst into tears when the victory was announced. Mayor Ralph Klein sang, "It's hard to be humble." All things considered, winning the bid would be the easy part because for Calgary, this wasn't just about 2 weeks in February. It was about legacy. Olympic cities usually built temporary structures or accepted that venues would be abandoned after the flame went out. But Calgary would redefine the games because every major venue would be permanent. And for that, the city turned to Bill Pratt. Pratt had overseen the construction of Calgary's Heritage Park in the 1960s. He had also been the general manager of the Calgary Exhibition and Stampede, which saw its revenue grow from $3 million to $30 million. And in 1976, after decades of hard work, he retired. But by June 1983, he was needed again. He was appointed the president of the Olympic Organizing Committee, and he had a lot to get done, and it wasn't going to be cheap. First, he had to oversee the completion and the opening of the Olympic Saddle Dome, which became the centerpiece of the Games. The arena would host hockey and figure skating and has a distinctive roof inspired by a Western saddle. City Council had approved building a $20,000 seat arena on the Stampede grounds west of the city's downtown on March 3, 1981, mere months before Calgary was awarded the Games. The decision was deeply unpopular, so Mayor Ralph Klein asked the provincial government to take over the land, allowing the city to bypass the appeal process. On July 29, 1981, construction began. Now, the arena was budgeted to cost $60 million, but it ballooned to $97.7 million by the time it finally opened on October 15, 1983. Now, at the time, it was the largest arena ever built for the Winter Games, but it would first host the Calgary Flames. Their first game in their new home was against the Edmonton Oilers, which they lost 4-3 in front of 17,000 fans. Among them was Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who was the distinction of being the first person ever booed in the arena. He retired from politics in early 1984, but by then the plans were well on their way to the first covered speed skating oval in North America, and was to be the first at a Winter Olympics. The original plan had been for speed skating events to be held outdoors, and that was quickly nixed once everyone realized that one Chinook could derail everything. Now, for those wondering, European settlers on the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain foothills, especially in southern Alberta, Montana, and Colorado, adopted the word Chinook to describe warm, dry, downslope wind. The term was likely used because these winds come from the west or southwest and in the general direction of the Chinookian lands and Pacific trade routes. Calgary sits on Blackfoot ancestral lands, and in their language, the weather phenomenon is known as snow eater. Now that is a very apt name. It is truly amazing to experience. You can wake up at minus 20 Celsius and within just a couple hours, snow is melting around you. In fact, January 10th, 1962, in Pincher Creek, 200 kilometers south of Calgary, the temperature went from minus 19 Celsius to plus 22 Celsius in 1 hour. The weather would become an issue, but we'll get to that. Because by the time Calgary won the bid for the Olympics, studies commissioned by the University of Calgary also showed real value in building a covered, permanent facility that would serve athletes, students, and the public long after the Games. Now, construction began in 1985 using precast, pre-stressed concrete similar to Calgary's Saddle Dome, with a distinctive arched roof supported by a system of perimeter and internal beams. It was completed in September 1987, around 5 months before the Olympics, and cost approximately $39.9 million, or about $109 million in today's dollars. And somehow, it wasn't the most expensive venue for the Games. The distinction went to Canada Olympic Park, which would host the bobsleigh, luge, ski jumping, and Nordic combined events. It was constructed on the former site of the Pascapoo Ski Hill, which was renovated for $200 million. Downhill skiing and other Nordic events wouldn't be hosted in Calgary. For that, athletes would travel west to the small community of Canmore. Now, the local economy was hit incredibly hard since mining operations ceased in 1979, so they saw construction of the Nordic Centre, which would host cross-country skiing, the biathlon, and other events, as a salvation. The centre, built at a cost of $17.2 million, helped Canmore become a thriving tourist town. And nearby in Kananaskis country, Games organizers announced that a ski resort would be constructed to host 10 alpine events. It would be a controversial decision. In 1985, the site, located at Mount Allen, was officially named Nikiska. The word comes from the Cree language meaning meeting place, and reflected both its role as a gathering spot and its envisioned legacy. Constructed at the cost of $25 million, construction took place between 1984 and 1986 and included building access roads, base facilities, installing permanent chairlifts, and clearing roughly 30 ski runs designed to meet international competition standards. This meant bulldozers excavated 25,000 cubic meters of rock, doing incredible harm to the local ecosystem. And things wouldn't get better for organizers because early inspections by the International Ski Federation said the course failed to meet standards, and they rejected the site. Courses had to be widened and grades sharpened, and by March 1987 it was deemed as one of the world's foremost downhill courses. And just over a few months later, in July of that year, Calgarians would get to enjoy a key piece of downtown revitalization and a focal point for visitors that would arrive a year later. Located just across from City Hall, Olympic Plaza was constructed between 1986 and 1987 in the heart of downtown Calgary as a dedicated venue for medal ceremonies. It was designed as a large, open, urban public place and featured a skating rink and a legacy walk paved with 20,000 inscribed bricks, which were sold to Calgarians at $19.88 each. The venue cost $5.6 million to build, but it became the spot for celebration as gold, silver, and bronze medals were given to Olympians in front of local and international spectators. As 1988 fast approached, Calgary was ready. Or at least, it thought it was. Anticipation for the games was brewing. Demand for tickets was incredibly high and main events had been sold out a year in advance. Unfortunately, as the games approached, the Olympic Organizing Committee failed to communicate its obligations to the IOC officials and sponsors and claimed 50% of the tickets. Now, Calgarians were livid, but the Olympic Organizing Committee made several changes, and by opening day, 79% of tickets had been allocated to Calgarians, with a total of 1.4 million tickets being sold. That was more tickets than the previous 3 Winter Games combined. Calgarians wanted to be part of history, and if they didn't get a ticket, they offered to help host the world. Katie Fisher with Canada Sports Hall of Fame said that the volunteer effort was extraordinary.
There was just under 700,000 people that lived in Calgary, and of that, 24,000 people applied to volunteer at the games. The people that did volunteer contributed by and large over 100 hours each. And many people here, sort of one of the reasons I can tell people that grew up in Calgary, if they're of a certain age, and if they're native to Calgary, they have a story about either volunteering at the games or watching the events live.
There were 9,400 volunteer positions, and everyone from oil executives to fast food workers signed up to be drivers, ushers, translators, medics, and hosts. They were trained to smile and to make visitors feel welcome. Their red and white uniforms became one of the most recognizable symbols of the games. Lynn Rennie was a 20-year-old student at the time, and she became one of them.
The idea of wanting to participate, wanting to contribute without any expectation of a spotlight or thank you. It was just a collaborative, experiential, open-hearted, wonderful, charming, sweet, welcoming. It was just, it was very Canadian.
Those that couldn't volunteer their time offered their homes. Entire neighborhoods adopted teams because for the first time ever, a homestay program was created and local families opened their homes to visitors. The University of Calgary suspended classes and turned student housing into an Olympic village for the athletes, and to meet and greet all those visitors and athletes were 2 polar bears in cowboy hats, the official mascots of the games, Heidi and Howdy. While Calgary was abuzz with anticipation, half a world away, the sun was shining on Greece on November 15th, 1987. Katerina Didascalou knelt next to a concave mirror at the Temple of Hera. The Greek actress was portraying the high priestess and reciting a prayer to the sun god Apollo. In her hand was a torch, designed by the National Research Council of Canada to look like a mini Calgary Tower. Katerina slowly placed the torch, made to withstand harsh Canadian winters, next to the mirror, and within seconds, the concentrated rays of the sun were supposed to light the torch. But the skies were overcast, so the flame from the previous day's rehearsal was used instead. Once lit, Katerina, with 14 handmaidens by her side, carried the torch to the grave where Baron Pierre Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic Games, was buried. She handed the torch to Greek runner Stelios Bisbas, who carried it with a branch of olive on a relay towards Athens. By doing so, she initiated the 15,000-kilometer journey of the flame from Greece to Canada. 2 days later, the torch arrived in St. John's, where it was handed over to Fred Hayward, the first Newfoundlander to represent Canada at the Winter Olympics, and Barbara Ann Scott, the beloved figure skater who won Olympic gold in 1948. For the next 88 days, it would travel through every province, every territory, in an effort to make all Canadians feel as though they were part of the Olympics. Now, a random draw was held, and 6,214 people were selected to carry the torch 1 kilometer each. And along the journey, 80 people in 40 support vehicles traveled 125 kilometers a day across the country. Mike McDonald carried the torch near his home on Cape Breton Island and was so enthralled with the experience that after his 1 kilometer was complete, he ran for a further 45 kilometers along the relay. 4-year-old Bruno Levesque of New Brunswick and his father Jerry submitted 100 applications, and when Bruno finished his run, he handed the flame to his father, who had also won a spot. Donalda Garner of Saskatchewan had to travel to Quebec City to carry the torch. She sold 7 goats, a horse, and poultry from her farm just to make the trip and said, "I can always rebuild a herd, but the chance to carry the torch only comes once in a lifetime." Heather Freer gave birth 9 hours after she carried the torch outside of Sarnia, and David Doucette carried a photo of his younger brother Jason. Jason had been selected in early 1987, but a few months later he sadly drowned, and his brother carried him and the flame in his stead. Amanda Wyoran submitted an astonishing 16,280 applications for the honor of carrying the torch on her birthday, and said, "I'll be able to show that to my grandkids and say, that's what I did on my 18th birthday." In Inuvik, Northwest Territories, Janice Nickel held the torch while being pulled by 7 dogs on a sled, and as she reached Sir Alexander Mackenzie School, 1,500 people were outside in minus 35 degrees Celsius weather to cheer her on. The relay was the longest in history until the 2000 Sydney Games, and as the torch finally approached Calgary, Karen Nicholson said she was ready to have her own Olympic moment.
Both me and my sister put 88 applications in, right? We happened to get drawn on that, and they worked it so that there was another girl that lived down the street from us, right, that she also got her name drawn, right? So they put it so that she passed the torch to me and I passed to my sister.
Halfway through her run, Karen was stopped because someone else would be joining.
I wasn't told that Mayor Klein at the time would be joining me. So in my head, I was going, uh-oh. But it turned out to just be Mayor Klein and a bunch of CEOs from Petro-Canada and stuff. And it was the day before my birthday, actually. And it was something like 35 below zero. And like we're running along, right? And I got a bit of frostbite, actually. So we have like one of the Petro-Canada things was putting their glove or hand in front of my face as I was running to block the wind.
Now, I found that photo in my research, but I couldn't see Karen's face in the photo because, just like she said, a Petro-Canada employee had her hand over her face. And as the flame got closer, everyone wondered who would have the honor of carrying the torch into McMahon Stadium to light the cauldron.
The city itself is decked out in the most festive colors. The welcome signs are in place. The mascots are practicing to greet an expected 1.6 million visitors. And the mayor of Calgary, Ralph Klein, is optimistic.
The Olympics come at a time when the city needs an economic boost, when we need to show the world that there are indeed opportunities here for investment.
And the people?
It's very exciting, and we're trying to be as helpful as we can. We're supposed to be the friendly city.
The city was overflowing for the opening ceremonies on February 13th, 1988. The big day had finally arrived. In McMahon Stadium, usually home to the CFL's Calgary Stampeders, 60,000 people sat in minus 18 degrees Celsius weather to be part of the visual spectacle that would include them. Every spectator had been given colored ponchos provided by the sponsor Coca-Cola, which had arrived days earlier with visible branding that went against IOC rules. Organizers sent them to a local prison where inmates removed the labels, but some inmates had to face some of the ponchos, and all 62,000 had to be individually checked before they were given out. And with everyone in the stands shivering with anticipation, the show was ready to begin. The ceremony began when 1,100 singers from across Alberta performed the theme to the games, Come Together. An estimated 1.5 billion worldwide television viewers then watched as 700 performers filled the stadium with a kaleidoscope of colors arranged in carefully choreographed patterns. First Nation dancers honored the land, their movements echoing centuries of tradition, while other performers brought in the spirit of the Calgary Stampede, connecting the city's frontier history with its global gathering. The RCMP were on hand to do a short version of the musical ride, and then the Parade of Nations began. Greece entered first, a nod to the Olympic roots. Then, in alphabetical order, 1,424 athletes entered the stadium waving flags while smiling and laughing despite the chill. Canada, as a host nation, would be the last, and led by beloved figure skater Brian Orser. The stadium roared with pride at the sight of the red maple leaf. Canadian icon Gordon Lightfoot then sang 4 strong winds, and between oaths and anthems, the ceremony pulses with Canadian pride. After the games were declared open, the Olympic flame entered the stadium in the hands of Kathleen Priestner and Ken Reid. Now, Priestner was a speed skating silver medalist at the 1976 Winter Olympics, and Reid was a legend and one of the crazy Canucks who took the skiing world by storm in the 1970s. And you'll hear more about the crazy Canucks and hear directly from Ken Reid in my episode later this month. The two torchbearers momentarily shared the flame with Rick Hansen. The Paralympian had recently returned from his Man in Motion tour around the world, which had helped raise $26 million for spinal cord research. They then passed the torch to 12-year-old Robin Perry, a figure skater representing the athletes of the future. She then climbed up the 65 steps to the Olympic cauldron, which was surrounded on 3 sides by the largest teepee ever built. And as she stood on her toes and held the torch to the cauldron, with a whoosh, it sprang to life. Lynn Rennie in her poncho remembers how the flames leaped skyward as a formation of snowbird jets streaked overhead, trailing smoke in the Olympic colors.
I remember being cold, and I remember being super surprised by the snowbirds shooting over top.
Then, something unexpected happened. Lynn Rennie said a few kilometers away at the Calgary Tower, flames suddenly shot into the sky as well.
Somebody in their genius entrepreneurial brain decided they would outfit the Calgary Tower with a cauldron of gas on top of it. So this is nuts, but awesome nuts. During the Olympics, the Calgary Tower would have a flame lit on top of it every time there was a medal celebration.
A natural gas-filled cauldron was built on top of the Calgary Tower by Canadian Western Natural Gas in October 1987 to serve as a giant Olympic torch in the background of medal ceremonies at the nearby Olympic Plaza. And back at McMahon Stadium, the soft strains of Gilles Villeneuve's song Mon Pays would be heard. It's Quebec's unofficial national anthem was meant as a celebration of bilingualism. Then voices of all languages sang along with celebration to the theme of the games, Can't You Feel It, as doves took flight, gliding over the stadium, a living symbol of peace and unity.
It was a day for pride, a time to savor the fulfillment of a dream that started 7 years ago. The athletes marched in like the heroes they hoped to become. At last, it was Canada's turn. A beaming Brian Orser, world champion figure skater, carried the flag, and the crowd went wild.
I declare open the Games of Calgary, celebrating the 15th Olympic Games.
With that, the 15th Winter Olympic Games were officially open. But then, Mother Nature had other plans. Remember the Chinooks I mentioned earlier? Those pesky warm winds that encouraged Calgary to build the Oval? Well, after those bitterly cold opening ceremonies, temperatures swung from -22 on February 13th to nearly 20 degrees the next day. Outdoor events had to be delayed, including downhill skiing in Nikiska, on account of 160-kilometer winds tearing through the mountains. With snow melting, artificial snow had to be used. Lynn Reddy said it was something no one expected to happen in the Great White North.
How can we have a Winter Olympics and there's no snow? So for your listeners, Calgary is the home of really cold weather in the winter and really strong swings of temperatures because of the Chinook winds that come in from the mountains. And then the Olympics started and a Chinook came barreling down from the mountains. So during the 2 weeks of the Olympics, it went from like minus 10 to plus 17 Celsius over the course of a few days. And it was like, this is a little embarrassing. There's no snow.
Over at Canada Olympic Park, ski jumping was postponed 4 times due to those high winds. But that is where one man's story became half history, half legend. Michael Eddie Edwards was a British ski jumper who became one of the most famous athletes of the 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics, not because he won medals, but because he showed up at all. Nicknamed Eddie the Eagle, he won the hearts of the world with his unlikely story. He was born in 1963 in Cheltenham, England, far from mountains and snow. And when he arrived in Calgary, he hadn't been groomed by a national sports system or backed by sponsors. Britain had no real ski jumping tradition, and until Eddie, no one had participated in the event for decades. He had paid his own way and taught himself to ski jump largely on borrowed equipment. Eddie was also nearsighted, famously wearing oversized glasses that fogged up in the cold. And he arrived in Calgary by qualifying in the 1987 World Championships in Bavaria, where he ranked 55th. Eddie competed in the 70-meter and 90-meter ski jumps events at the Canada Olympic Park. He finished last in both events. But that detail hardly mattered. What matters was that he competed in these jumps and landed safely. And at the bottom of the hill, he stood smiling as crowds cheered him like a champion. Surrounded by elite athletes, Eddie became a symbol of something simpler and older, the Olympic ideal of participation over perfection, and with that came fame. Overnight, he became a celebrity and even appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, as the press dubbed him Mr. Magoo and the Ski Dropper. The Calgary Herald wrote, "It may be hard for historians to explain how a 24-year-old plasterer from Great Britain, who finished dead last in both of his events, could become the hero of the games. But there was no doubt ski jumper Eddie Edwards was the fans' favorite." End quote. The attention he received actually caused the IOC to create the Eddie the Eagle rule, which requires competitors to place in the top 30% or top 50 competitors in international events leading up to the Olympics. Because Eddie the Eagle wasn't the only unlikely athlete at Canada Olympic Park. The bobsleigh track snaked down the unforgiving hill in Calgary. It was designed for nations that had been sliding on snow for generations, which is why the crowd picked the unlikely favorites to fall in love with, Jamaica. At home, there was no snow-covered mountains, no sleds, and yet here they were. And the Jamaican bobsled team wasn't a joke. Coached by Howard Sealer, who had competed at the 1972 and 1980 Olympics, they had arrived in Calgary as the ultimate underdog. The idea for the team began only a year earlier, in 1987, when an American businessman living in Jamaica noticed military recruits sprinting while pushing heavy carts. To him, it looked exactly like the explosive start bobsledding is known for, so he turned to Captain William Baldy Maloney of the Jamaican Defense Force to recruit sprinters that were disciplined, fast, and strong. The team would be made up of Dudley Stokes, Devin Harris, and Michael White, who were selected from the Army, along with civilians Frederick Powell, Sammy Clayton, and Caswell Allen. After making the team, they traveled to an ice hockey rink in Lake Placid to try running on ice, and a month later they were in Calgary, sledding for the first time before they traveled to Europe to train wherever they could, selling t-shirts for supper, borrowed sleds to compete, and learning the sport at a pace no elite athlete ever should. And just before Christmas 1987, they learned they would be going to the Winter Olympics, even though officials doubted they belonged and tried to disqualify them before the Olympics. That's when influential people, including Prince Albert of Monaco, stepped in to champion them. And so, when they arrived in Calgary, they were instant celebrities. A week before the game started, the team held a promotional party at a Greek restaurant where they raffled off a ticket to Jamaica and sold sweatshirts. The team was already so popular that people were lined up around the street to catch a glimpse of them. And by now, driver Sammy Clayton had quit the program, which meant the team had only started practicing on a borrowed sled for only about a month, and they didn't actually have a 4-man sled of their own. First up was the two-man bobsled team of Dudley Stokes and Michael White, who reached a high of 22nd place in their second run but finished 30th out of 41 competitors after 4 runs. Now, as I mentioned, the Jamaicans didn't own their own 4-man sled, so they borrowed one the Canadians had stored away and were willing to lend to them. As Dudley wrote in Newsweek, "It was a bucket, and we fixed it up as best we could and started practicing on the ice." But the challenging times weren't behind them. On the first day of training, Caswell Allen fell off the sled and hurt himself. That's when Dudley Stokes turned to his brother Chris, who had traveled to Calgary for the games as a spectator. He was standing close by because he ran a 100-meter track in college, and somehow, by the end of the day, he had Olympic accreditation. After 3 days of training, the Jamaican bobsled team with new addition Chris Stokes would be making history. The first day of the 4-man competition was a disaster. The men finished 24th in the first run and 26th in the second. They weren't competing last, but far from where they were hoping to be. On the morning of the second day of races, the team took off with the 7th fastest start of the event. But inside the sled, things were not going well. Around curve 9, they started porpoising as the front of the sled was moving up and down. Then they tipped and flipped upside down as they crashed. And inside the sled, the Jamaican team watched the ice go by as they skidded violently on the ice. The race was over, and the crowd watched in silent horror as the sled came to a stop. Then, the 4 men slowly climbed out of the sled. They were shaken, but uninjured, and one by one they gathered themselves, and then they lifted the sled, and as they carried it, the crowd erupted. Thousands of people on their feet, clapping, shouting, whistling in the air. Because much like Eddie the Eagle had done, the Jamaican bobsled team reminded the world of the courage it takes just to compete. It was something that stayed with Lynn Rennie as well.
You had of course, Eddie the Eagle. Everybody was wanting to see Eddie the Eagle. And I remember at the time in Calgary, there was a very popular nightlife street called Electric Avenue. And there was a series of bars along Electric Avenue, 11th Avenue. And there would always be this rumor mill, the Jamaican bobsled's going to be in Electric Avenue. And so it was fun. It was very sweet.
The Jamaican bobsledders and Eddie the Eagle may not have won medals in 1988, but they ensured interest in their respective sports. Britain returned to ski jump in the 2002 Winter Olympics thanks to Glyn Peterson. But unlike the other underdogs in the story, Jamaica returned to Olympic bobsledding in later games and built a real program, proving that Calgary was not a fluke, it was a beginning. Jamaica was part of the 1992, 1994, 1998, and 2022 games. They reached 14th in 1994 and expanded the program to include a 2-woman bobsled team, which competed in 2018 and finished 19th. And both Eddie the Eagle and the Jamaican bobsled team have also had their story told, heavily fictionized, in movies. And in 2026, keep an eye out for the Jamaicans at Milano Cortina, because they may have you saying, feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme, get on up, it's bobsled time. As Calgarians fell in love with ski jumping and bobsledding, the rest of Canada waited for its first medal of the Games. That came on day 6 when Karen Percy won bronze in women's downhill on February 19th. She followed that up 3 days later with another bronze in women's Super G. The podium finishes were special for the 21-year-old who was born in Banff and grew up skiing and now had won in her own backyard. But you may not remember who won the first medal because the spotlight of the world wasn't on the slopes, but the rink. If there was one sport where Canadians were desperate for gold, it was figure skating. The men's event, which was dubbed the Battle of the Bryans, became the emotional center of the game. Canada's Brian Orser was the hometown favorite. Known as Mr. Consistency, Orser was smooth, reliable, and deeply musical. He had won silver 4 years earlier in Sarajevo and won the 1987 World Championship on a perfect season because he didn't lose a single competition. He arrived in Calgary determined to finish the story on home ice. Brian Boitano of the United States stood in his way. Boitano was powerful and technical and precise. Where Orser glided, Boitano attacked. His jumps were higher, sharper, and his programs were built to win under the sport's rigid judging system. He won the 1986 World Championship by beating, you know who, Brian Orser. So the competition in Calgary unfolded with almost unbearable tension. At the time, the figure skating event was divided into 3 phases: compulsory figures, the short program, and the long program. After the compulsory figures, Russian Alexander Fediev was in first, followed by Boitano in second, and Orser in third. Up next was a short program where Orser shot up to first place as Boitano finished second. With 50% of the final score accounted for, whoever won the long program would win the gold. In a dead heat, they took to the ice. Boitano was first, and he skated a technically perfect program with 8 triple jumps, including 2 triple axels. Orser was up next, and he gave the performance of his life, landing 7 triple clean jumps, tied together by controlled footwork and confident presence. When he finished, the arena erupted. This was the skate Canadians had been waiting for. But figure skating is not won by applause, and when the judges' scores appeared, the result was devastatingly close. Boitano's technical difficulty was undeniable. He had won gold by a single point. Boitano took the gold, Orser took the silver. There was no controversy, only heartbreak. Orser stood on the podium composed and gracious, but the absence of gold hung heavily in the air. Years later, the rivalry would be remembered as one of the greatest duels in figure skating history. In 1988, it was raw and unresolved. But Canada wasn't done earning hardware at the rink because 3 days later, Tracy Wilson and Robert McCall squeezed onto the podium and put a stop to the all-Soviet Union sweep. The Soviet Union had dominated the event as they had in pairs where they also took gold and silver. Meanwhile, a young skater from Ottawa was about to burst onto the scene to become Canada's sweetheart. Inspired by Barbara Ann Scott, Elizabeth Manley started to skate at a young age. And by the time she was 17 in 1982, she had won bronze at the World Junior Championship, at the Sarajevo Olympics, and finished 4th at the 1987 World Championships. Heading into the Calgary Olympics, the women's competition was defined by 2 names before it ever began. Katharina Witt of East Germany was the defending Olympic champion. She was confident, experienced, and politically protected. Witt represented a system built to produce winners. Her skating was powerful and theatrical, shaped by years of elite training and expectation. Across from her stood Debbie Thomas of the United States, the reigning world champion. Thomas was an extraordinary athlete. She was intense, fast, and technically daring. She was also a media favorite because she was balancing elite sport with pre-med studies, and who doesn't love a story like that? Elizabeth Manley was mentioned, but rarely centered. As expected, after compulsory figures in the short program, Witt and Thomas finished top 2, while Manley sat in 3rd behind Thomas, but the crowd knew something was brewing. When the skaters hit the Saddledome ice, spectators sensed something building. It wasn't dominance, but momentum. When Elizabeth Manley stepped onto the ice for her free program, the atmosphere shifted. She skated with joy and speed and fearlessness. Her jumps were as big as her footwork was sharp. She performed not just as someone protecting a lead, but as someone with nothing to lose. The program was the skate of her life. Manley said, "On my last spin, it was like the world was caving in. It was overwhelming. I just wanted to dance." As she hit her final pose, the crowd exploded. For the first time during the games, Canadians felt something close to certainty. The judges rewarded her with high marks, and she moved into first place. Announcer Jim McKay said, "Wouldn't it be great if every human being could have a moment like this once in their lives?" And then she had to wait. Lynn Rennie was working at the concession and said it was a night she will never forget.
It was a very big deal. I remember, apart from the crowd just going insane, like you could tell it was that she had skated well because the crowd went nuts. But when it revealed that she also won the silver medal, all of us Calgarian workers were freaking out, just like, so excited, so proud. And I was able to sneak out of my little concession hole and take a look at the ice when she was getting her silver medal. And that was I still get chills.
Debbie Thomas skated next, and her program, set to Carmen, was ambitious and intense, but she unraveled as she missed jumps and the performance lacked control. When the score came up, Thomas had fallen behind Manley, and only Katharina Witt stood in the way of Manley's victory. When Katharina Witt stepped onto the ice to perform Carmen, she skated with the calm of someone who had been here before. She avoided major mistakes and carried an intense authority. Her free skate was not perfect, but it was composed and the judges responded accordingly. The difference was narrow. Inside the Saddledome, the reaction was complicated. There was disappointment, but somehow for the first time, Canada had a moment that felt like victory. Elizabeth Manley's silver medal was one of the most emotional moments of the Games. She had skated fearlessly, and in the games where Canada would not win gold, Manley's performance stood out as proof that belief still mattered. Her silver did not feel like second place. It felt like the arrival for Canada's sweetheart. As I mentioned, in 1988, much like Montreal in 1976, Canada did not win a gold medal. There was hope that Team Canada would top the podium in hockey, but that was not to be as the team finished fourth and lost 5-0 to the Soviet Union in the semi-final. Now on the other side of the country, a 6-month-old boy named Sidney Crosby was taking his first steps, and in 22 years' time, he would make that golden dream on home ice a reality. In the end, Canada won only 5 medals, 2 silver and 3 bronze. Not a great medal haul, but it was the second most medals won by Canada at the Winter Olympics, behind Lake Placid in 1932. However, Canada had more top 8 finishes than in any previous games. Calgary has welcomed athletic excellence, but on the night of February 28, 1988, McMahon Stadium filled one last time. There were no races left to run, no judges' scores to wait for, no medals to be won. The tension that had defined the previous 2 weeks had loosened, replaced by something warmer. A mixture of relief, pride, and a quiet sense of finality. 60,000 people, 10,000 of which were volunteers in their red and white jackets that had become symbols of the games, were in attendance. It was their moment too, and the crowd acknowledged them openly, and the applause lingered as the athletes entered not by nation, but together. Skaters, skiers, and sliders walked side by side, waving to the crowd. Some wore medals around their necks. Others carried cameras. A few looked exhausted. All of them looked human again. On the largest temporary ice rink in the world, a figure skating performance took place inside the stadium. Then Alberta musician Katie Lang performed Turn Me Round. The ceremony leaned into Canadian themes of winter and openness and community. Music echoed as atmosphere and speeches were delivered with restraint. IOC President Juan Antonio Samaranch said to the crowd, "From your very first howdy to the last farewell, you have graciously met this challenge with your unique Western style and hospitality. In spite of your famous Chinook, you still managed to produce the best organization of the Olympic Winter Games ever." He then declared the Olympic Winter Games closed. The Olympic flag was lowered and presented to Mayor Ralph Klein, who passed it to President of the IOC and then went into the waiting hands of Henri Dupuis, the mayor of Albertville, France, and the host of the 1992 Winter Olympics. Then, the Olympic flame was extinguished. After years of planning, it was all over. But the legacy of those 2 weeks would be far-reaching. Even with the headaches, traffic jams, and years of preparation, Lynn Reddy said, when it was all said and done, the Calgary Olympics were a monumental success.
Although I think a lot of Calgarians were side-eyeing the Olympic Committee and all of the work going on, just like, this better be worth it. Once it started, once it got going, and once the economic benefits became visible and obvious, Calgarians were like, yes, sir, let's climb right on that wagon train. It was a good thing for Calgary.
Unlike Montreal, in 1976, the Calgary Games boasted a $32 million surplus and single-handedly pulled the city out of recession. But Katie Fisher with Canada Sports Hall of Fame said the Games did much more. They left a legacy which can be felt today.
The legacy of the Games is very much surrounding us. I can look out and I can see the old ski jump and bobsled track across the street. They continue to train at bobsled at the highest level. So how we celebrate the legacy is, again, through the Hall of Famers and continuing to celebrate the stories.
Facilities built for the Games gave Canada world-class training, which would be seen in the incredible results. From 1924 to 1984, Canada won 38 medals at the Winter Olympics. About 1/4 of those were in hockey. But then, from 1992 to 2022, Canada won 182 medals. In 2010 in Vancouver, we literally owned the podium by winning the most gold medals of any nation and set a then record for most gold medals at a Winter Games. Katie said those two eras are defined by the 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics.
I would say that the Olympic Winter Games in 1988 transformed the future of the city. and made it a cultural sporting destination. It created institutions that exist to this day and spaces that exist, including, the Canmore Nordic Center out in Canmore, and in the city, the Olympic Oval, the Saddle Dome. So it's been the legacy of the games has been ongoing to this day.
This year, to celebrate the 1988 Winter Olympics, Canada Sports Hall of Fame launched the Spirit of Motion exhibit. It showcases stories, artifacts, and videos of the 5 Canadian athletes that medaled in 1988, along with other Olympic treasures from the Calgary Games. The exhibit is free to view at the base of the Calgary Tower until April 2026. Speaking of the Calgary Tower, that natural gas cauldron is still on top of it, and it's still lit to celebrate holidays like Canada Day and important wins. In 1992, I remember landing at the Calgary International Airport and seeing the cauldron burning after the Stampeders won the Grey Cup. It was truly a surreal sight to see. But could the Tower cauldron be lit again for the Olympics? The city did contemplate a bid for the 2026 Games, but on November 13, 2018, in a non-binding vote, 56.4% of residents voted against it. The next day, the bid process was suspended. Katie, however, says she's optimistic.
The idea that Calgary could successfully host the games again, I absolutely agree. First, because we have the history to prove it, and also we continue to host national sporting events and the Calgary Stampede, which is a huge undertaking every year. So I think the proof is there, and it's just a matter of the will.
And if there's a will, there's a way. Much like there was a way for the Jamaican bobsled team. In 2025, Shane Pitter, Andre DeCrasse, Junior Harris, and Taekwondo Tracy won Jamaica's first gold medal at an international bobsleigh in Whistler. By doing so, they helped their country successfully qualify for 3 spots in the 2026 Winter Olympics in February. And as for me, should Calgary ever host another Winter Games? Well, I'm a hometown boy, born in Calgary, with a great bow tie, ready to help carry the torch, and I'll be there to help carry the Olympic spirit. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and our look at the Calgary Olympics. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories, and there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com. or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.